Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to demonstrate how to paint an ice skating gnome. So I am working on an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about the colors and brushes that I used for this painting. All of these are listed in the material section of this tutorial. So I have titanium white, unbleached titanium, light blue permanent, ultramarine blue, Hooker's green hue permanent, raw umber, Mars black. And for the brushes, I used 3 brushes for this tutorial. I used a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, a 12 bright brush, and a number 4 round brush. You'll also need a pencil and a ruler for this painting, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'm working on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. We're going to start out by marking where our horizon line is. So that's where our sky and, in this case, the ice rink is meet. And it's not exactly in the center of the canvas, so you want to find a point that's below the center of the canvas. If you want to be exact, mine is about 5 3/4 inches from the bottom of the canvas, so the center point would be 7, so it needs to be a little bit below that center point, and you'll want to adjust that if you're using a different size canvas. Next, we're going to paint the sky. So everything above that land is going to be our sky. And we have kind of a unique green sky in this painting. I wanted a muted color palette. So in order to mute that green color, that just means make it very light and kind of a neutral style. I added a whole bunch of white to it and a little bit of that beige color. That's that unbleached titanium. So you want to mix about like 1 part green and then a whole bunch of white and a little bit of that green, and you get this kind of creamy green color. I started in the center with my 3/4 flat brush, and I just did these angled strokes. You want to just kind of flip-flop your brush to create kind of a blob in the center. And the sky kind of varies throughout. I made it a little bit darker in the center, but then I quickly added more white kind of on the outskirts of it. So when I started painting the outer parts of it, I grabbed more white on my brush and just angled strokes. You're just painting like little X's on your canvas. You're not loading your brush in too much paint, just a little paint right there on the tip of the brush. It's easier to blend colors when there's not a lot of paint on your brush. If you feel like you need to add a teeny bit of water to your brush because the paint's not spreading very easily, you're welcome to do that. Just try not to add too much water at one time because then the paint will start dripping down. And we just want to do little X angle strokes, expressive strokes all throughout the sky. You're gently blending your green so that it kind of varies all throughout. You can play around with the beige color, so some areas might look a little bit more neutral, some might be a little bit more pure green because you're loading your brush in various amounts of that color. Again, I tried to make kind of the outer parts lighter and it being just a tad darker in the center. The sky is very light and muted on purpose because our gnome needs to stand out and have contrast in this painting. The gnome has a lot of green in his hat, similar colors in the sky. So in order for that to stand out, we want to make sure our sky stays nice and light and creamy. So very light in the sky. Next, we're going to paint everything below this with vertical strokes, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to blend the color light blue permanent with our titanium white. We can even use some of that cream color to kind of mute that blue a little bit, although I ended up not using a whole lot of it, just a little bit. So we want to rinse all of that green off of our 3/4 flat brush. And we're going to do the icy ground area. So we're going to go ahead and grab a whole bunch of white, teeny tiny bit of blue. We don't want this to be too much blue, just a little bit of blue kind of in there, and you do vertical strokes. We can see what happens when we add that beige color. Add a little bit more white to my palette. So we want to keep this icy area. I'm doing it all in vertical strokes. We want to keep the icy area light as well so that our gnome will stand out. And also, it is a frozen lake, so it's not super dark. We want to create the impression that it's a frozen body of water. So we're doing vertical strokes first. I'll go back over this with some horizontal strokes later, but for now, we're just blending our light blue, our white. You can use a little bit of that beige and just do vertical strokes using the full width of your brush. Make sure you have a higher proportion of white in there so that it is light. I do the unblended thing where I'm blending on the canvas, but I'm not mixing the color all the way on the canvas. I'm letting it kind of blend, but not all the way, so there's nice variation in color. So vertical all the way down. Everything below that line is painted with that technique. Next, I'm going to make just a little pile up of snow kind of along the horizon line, and we can even go under our horizon line. So I'm just loading white on the tip of my flat brush and just doing kind of short circular strokes, creating kind of a land area that is covered in snow. So again, this can go above the horizon line, and I even dipped it down below our horizon line, so some of that snow might cover some of our icy area. You can even add a little bit of that light blue color to the snow, so when we paint snow in pictures, it doesn't always have to be solid white. We can use blue for an example to kind of create color variation in that snow. Go back with a little bit more white. Just have this pile up a little bit more, overlapping our frozen lake a little bit further. So try to keep it very simple because we have a very detailed gnome that we're going to be painting in the foreground. A little bit of that blue just on the base of that snowy area gives it a little bit of shadow, but again, we don't have to be super detailed about it. Then I'm going to very lightly, so I know we did the vertical strokes on the ice, but I'm just going to go back over it with our light blue, just a little bit of it, and just a teeny bit of that white. So my brush is barely brushing the canvas, very lightly. I'm doing horizontal lines, so those are kind of crisscrossing our vertical lines, and that's going to create more of an impression that is a frozen lake area. So just a little bit, we don't want to cancel out all our vertical lines, just a few horizontal lines using the tip of the brush. You can use the full width of the brush and gently add those lines in there. So next we want to go ahead and let this dry before going to the next step. I will be drawing the gnome in the next step. So if you're drawing this with me, you'll need a pencil and an eraser, and we're going to go ahead and do this gnome drawing. So you want to draw very lightly. So our gnome, you can look at the placement of it. He takes up a large portion of our canvas, and I'm going to start by drawing the nose. So our nose is left and above the horizon line. So it's about an inch above our horizon line. Oval, kind of a flat oval shape for his nose. And then the base of his hat. So that is going to, top part is going to curve above the nose, and it's going to dip down towards the right, and we're about at the horizon line level with the bottom of his hat. So since he's ice skating, our hat will be flowing to the right because he's skating to the left, and we just want to sketch a curve, and then we want to draw his hat so that it's kind of flowing towards the left and curving down. So I drew the hat curve and then it gets smaller towards the edge and the tip is curved on the tip. If you want to do more of a pointed tip, you can do more of a pointed tip. And then our beard, so we can draw our basic beard shape, kind of a big teardrop shape. And the beard is also flowing to the right. It's going to make it look like our gnome is skating to the left, so the movement of the beard and the hat and even the bottom of his robe are all flowing towards the right. So I drew kind of a large teardrop shape, started from his nose, curves down, goes to a point, and the length of the beard lines up with the hat. And then we have his arm, or his sleeve, so that one angles down. And we can do a simple mitten hand, so a bigger oval shape with his little thumb kind of sticking out on the bottom. And then the edging of his sleeve has some white fluffy stuff material on the edging that we'll paint later. And then his other arm we can see sticking out through his beard. So just kind of a simple sleeve shape, his mitten hand and the edging. Then we can do his robe, so it goes down just a little bit further than the beard, not by much, just maybe 3/4 of an inch below the beard. And it also is flowing to the right, so you want to draw the robe so that it goes to a point on the right but flows. And then we can draw his little boots. His ice skates are kind of peeking through under that robe. So just a simple shoe shape. And his little ice skate blade below that. So we can do two little rectangular shapes under the shoe and then the ice skate blade under that. And then his other shoe. Also, he's got his little shoelaces, so I did little zigzag lines and then a little simple bow for the tied shoelaces. And then the other skate needs to look like it's higher than the one on the right and a little bit more under the robe. So I did not much of that shoe is showing through, but kind of the same thing, the shoe shape, the blade, the little zigzag lines for the tie. And then we can draw the ice skating line that's on the frozen pond. We can just draw the little trail that our gnome made. We don't have to draw that right now. We can always just paint that in and not draw it. But that is it for the gnome drawing, and we're going to go ahead and start painting him in. So the first thing we're going to do is load our palette with the Unbleached Titanium, and you'll want to freshen your titanium white if that has dried up on you, since the painting in the background was dried and we drew the gnome, so it might be dried up for you. And I'll be using a number 4 round brush. So I'm going to start by painting the nose, and the nose is just a basic solid coat of the beige color. There will be a few other colors added to this later, like white and brown for shadowing, but for now we're just painting that solid beige. And you'll also need to freshen your palette with the Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, so that green color, and we'll be doing the hat next. So for the most part, except for the beard, I used the number 4 round brush for the entire gnome. For the beard, I used the 12 bright brush. So this is just the round brush, and I'll let you know when we're switching to the bright brush when we do the beard. So then we also need Mars Black, so you'll need Mars Black as well. So we're going to do the hat, and we want to start on the bottom of the hat. To make this green darker, add a teeny tiny bit of black to it. So maybe 3 parts green, 1 part black. Doesn't have to be exact, just make it a couple shades darker. And I'm going to start by painting that bottom edge of the hat with this dark green color. So it contours over the top of his nose and dips down. So all this bottom edging is that dark green. So just short strokes, holding your brush in the color, taking your time to fill that in solid. And then we need to go ahead and fill the rest of the hat in. So I loaded some more white on my brush, and you want to just kind of be careful because the background is green and white. Our hat is green and white, so we want to make sure that we're still adding a higher proportion of green to our hat so that it stands out from the sky. Also, I'm adjusting my hat just slightly, so at the top curve I brought it down just a little bit below my drawing, so you can see that pencil line that kind of went higher. I decided to make my hat go down just a little bit lower. So I'm adjusting that as I'm painting in, which is very common when I do these paintings. I do the drawing, and then when I paint it in, it gets adjusted. And then so I'm outlining my hat first with my color. It's green, little bits of white in there to get some color variation. We want to make sure that it stands out from the sky. So I went ahead and I outlined my hat shape, and then I can go ahead and start filling it in. So I used white to make that green a little bit lighter. It's lighter than our bottom edging, so our bottom edging is a darker green. We're also going to add some darker green patterns in there in a later step. So we want to use white to make it kind of a medium gray, medium green. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my 12 bright brush. I know I said that I was only going to use this for the beard part. Actually, we're going to use it for the hat as well, just because it's a larger area and it makes a little bit more sense to use the flat brush for this. So I want to fill my hat in using curved strokes that contour in the direction of the hat. And this is going to give our hat some kind of form to it, almost like if we're making it 3D looking, because we're making our strokes go in that curved direction. So I, with my flat brush, am double loading it in the green and the white, kind of letting those colors blend to create some variation in that green tint. We can add little bits of water in that to kind of thin it down and help spread it. Again, we want to make sure our green is darker than our sky. So we are adding white to it, but we're not adding as much white as our sky had. And we're not using any of the beige color in there as well. So curved strokes using the full width of that brush. Fill the rest of that hat in. Our colors are gently blending on the canvas. Then I want to add some white. So I loaded my brush and a teeny tiny bit of white right there on the tip of the brush. I'm going to kind of highlight my hat using the white just on the left part of the hat, not on the right part, just on the left, almost dry brush style. So I'm only loading my brush in a teeny tiny bit of white, and I'm just kind of dragging it from the edge of the hat, curving it and just kind of letting my stroke go. The white doesn't go across the hat, it just on the left part gives that a little bit more color variation and highlight. Then we could do the sleeves and the robe. So the sleeves and the robe, not complicated, no shading or highlighting with it. I just took the green and painted those shapes in solid. This one over here on the right, I wanted to paint that in before the beard so I didn't lose the position of it. So when we paint the beard, we're going to have to go around this sleeve. You could have done it the opposite way, where you paint the beard first and then paint your sleeve and hand over that. But I wanted to do the green sleeve first. And then we did the robe. So the robe, same thing, nothing too complicated, just painting that shape in. So I'm just taking the bright brush, kind of using the tip of it to sort of just outline that shape. Remember that he's skating, so we want to make our robe look flowy. So the bottom part, curvy, wavy lines. It goes to a point over on the right. but we're not worried about shading or highlighting. We're just painting that in the green. Keep in mind the bottom edge of the beard is going to overlap our bottom part of the robe just slightly, so you can bring that green up a little bit further if you want. And that's it with the green part of our gnome. And we are going to move on and start painting his beard in. So for the beard, I used the 12 bright brush first, and then later on I detailed it with a round brush. Our first layer is actually going to be a medium gray color. So on our palette, we want to mix about 3 parts white to 1 part black. It doesn't have to be exact, but just make a light to medium gray color. So this is going to be our darker undertone of the beard. You can look at the finished version. It is a lighter color beard, but with some darker areas to it. But for now, we want to go ahead and just paint a solid coat of this grayish color. So I'm mixing more gray on my palette. If I mix it again, it might be slightly darker. That's okay. You can just blend with the other version of the gray that's already on the canvas. Same thing as if you blended it again and it's slightly lighter, you can kind of blend it in. In other words, it doesn't have to all be the same shade of gray. So as we're painting this in, using the tip of the brush, you can outline the shape of the beard. Using the full width of the brush, so using all those bristles, pressing down, we can paint larger areas. You want to paint the strokes. The paint strokes need to be flowing in the direction of the beard. So we're not painting all vertical strokes or all horizontal strokes. These strokes are flowing in the direction of the beard. So if it's curving downwards, that's the direction our strokes need to go. You can add a little bit of water to your brush if needed to kind of thin it down and help with the flow. Outline that bottom part of his nose and then fill it in. You can use the tip of the brush to outline, and then you can take the width of your brush to drag it outwards. You want to make sure you go around your sleeve. So we're already starting to create some texture with this. More texture is going to be created later with the round brush. I'm going to go around the sleeve. So maybe the direction of that hair might shift just slightly because of that sleeve. It might go down and around that sleeve. So you want to kind of think about that. This piece of hair might go down and then to the right. And then it's okay to paint over his hand. So I can paint this area right here to the right of his sleeve because we can easily paint our mitten again. We can recreate that shape. If it covers that drawing, that's okay. Really make sure that your beard shape is defined and outlined. So I kind of took the tip of the brush and outlined the edging of it a little bit. We can go back over some of this with a little bit of white, but like I said, later on we will take our round brush and do some more detail work in there. I'm just kind of making sure that nothing is showing through, so I have good coverage. None of that blue is still showing through. There might be a little bit because it's a thin coat of paint, but for the most part we have pretty good coverage at this point. So we're going to let that beard dry before we go and do detail work on it. And I'm going to move along and do the ice skates next. So the ice skates, I did raw umber and the number 4 round brush. So you want to go ahead, load your palette with the brown, use your round brush, and go ahead and paint your ice skates in. So just simply outline the shape of your ice skate and then fill it in solid. We're not doing shading or highlighting to the shoes at all, so just very simple. And then I'll go ahead and paint our other little ice skate. Then I'm going to rinse and dry and then grab our the titanium white and Mars black. We're going to do the blade of the ice skate next. So we're going to make kind of a medium gray color, almost the same shade of gray that we did the beard. So mix white with a teeny bit of black on our palette. This is a small area, so you'll want to twist the brush to get a thinner color. I will add black in this. I just did white first. Teeny tiny bit of black right there. Letting that kind of blend on the canvas, but not over blend. So we have a variation of white and black that kind of give it that shiny look. So I will go ahead and do the other blade. So you do the bottom piece and the two little attached parts. And then we're going to go back to the beard. So now that our base coat has dried a little bit, if it's super wet, I would kind of skip this step and maybe come back or dry your painting really quick. It also doesn't have to be completely dry. So if that gray is still a teeny bit wet, that's fine as well. But I'm going to take my round brush. So we used the flat brush to paint the base coat of our beard. We're going to use the round brush to do detail work. And we want to load that in the titanium white. And I started the bottom of the beard and I'm doing curved strokes. We don't want to cover all of that darker gray. We're going to let it still kind of show through. That's going to create that kind of shadow under layer of the beard. The white is going to create the detail work, the texture of the hair strands in the beard. So these are going in the direction of the curve. So right here it curves under the hat. So our strokes are curving and contouring in that direction. They curve and contour around the sleeve. And we're not covering all of the gray. We're using that gray to be our darker strands. So we're letting a lot of that gray still show through. You could have some of those white strokes kind of go outside of your shape that you initially painted. That's fine. So these are long and they curve to the right. So I'm just going to keep layering this white so I can go back over some of the strands that I painted before. The second layer. Again, I don't want to cover all of that dark gray. I just want to add more layers onto this that creates the texture. So under the nose, it's actually a little bit darker. So I added a little tiny bit of black on my brush, and this will blend into kind of a dark to medium gray color. But the strands that are under his nose are darker, and they just kind of blend back in with the rest of the white gray strands. So I can go back with some white, kind of go over that and let that blend. That kind of creates shadow under his nose. And then towards the bottom as well, I added some darker strands down there. So I can get that black and let that blend in with the white. So we have some darker strands towards the bottom. Next, I am going to touch up his nose a bit. So we just had that one layer of the unbleached titanium. I want to go in and add some darker shadow to it, kind of make it look a little bit more 3D. So take your brown and mix that with your bleach color, your unbleached titanium color, so that beige color. So it makes a lighter version of that brown. And just along the inner edge of it, so it would be darker under our hat. So that's going to have that darker color, and it would be darker towards the bottom. So just paint the inner circumference of that oval. So that's darker. And then you can get your beige color and kind of do a second coat in the middle and blend that with your darker color. And then you can get titanium white and just do one curve towards the top, and that'll just kind of create a little shiny color towards the top of his nose. You can even render it further, take your finger and just kind of blend it with the rest so we have a lighter part. So that creates some 3D effect with the nose, so it's not just flat color. Next, we are going to introduce Ultramarine Blue to the palette. So his mittens are this color. We're just going to load our number 4 round brush in the blue, and we're going to go ahead and paint his hands. So you should still see it from the initial drawing, but it's a very basic mitten hand. We have a large oval shape that is flat against the sleeve, and we have his little thumb sticking down, smaller oval shape. So if you still see pencil marks from the drawing, you can erase those in a later step. You just want to make sure your painting is dry and erase those lines. They should be able to erase. And then our other little thumb, so we have our mitten on the right. So that part is painted over the beard. That part I didn't really see my original drawing, but it wasn't really a hard shape to recreate. So we have his mitten shapes. We can go back over those with a second coat after that dries if we want those to appear darker. I also used the Ultramarine Blue to do the little skate marks on the ice. So I use the number 4 round brush for this, but if your brush is not giving you that thin line, you can try a smaller brush, but you want to load that paint just on the tip and very, very lightly with a very steady hand, do a very thin little trail scratch mark on the ice. And the second one I did with Mars Black. So that second one that's higher actually goes for a loop. So you can just kind of make up a little trail, just doing a wavy line. You can make it go towards a loop. We did draw it earlier. If you feel more confident drawing it again to kind of get your trail the way you want it, go ahead and do that, but it needs to be a very thin and very loose line using the blue and the black. And then we can take our black and just loosely outline the bottom of his skates. And next we're going to do kind of a watercolor technique. So I am going to create some, if you look at the finished version of the painting, it's got some blue, darker blues in the ice area, the frozen ice area. And to do that, we want to water down our ultramarine blue to a watercolor consistency. And so this has to be very thin because it cannot be bright, opaque color. It needs to be thin. And we just want to create the impression that there's some darker tones of color on the ice, maybe some reflection from the trees in the background. And I'm just taking my brush and holding it at an angle to use the side of the bristles. So the side of the bristle is what's going on the canvas, and it's creating some very loose, abstract, blobbed areas. So I'm just doing left and right strokes using all the bristles on its side, and it's just skidding the canvas. So there's going to be a large tree on the left, and perhaps it's reflecting some darker color onto the ice. And we can even do some darker color on the bottom underneath the gnome's skates. And then there's some darker color in the upper left. So just kind of all throughout the ice. The intent obviously is not to cover up all of our pretty light blue color. It's just to add another layer of color to the ice. Next, I am adding a second coat of paint to my ice skates, specifically on the bottom, just to make that bottom part of the skate a little bit darker. So I just took that brown and added that on the bottom. And then on the bottom of his robe, same thing with the green, adding kind of a second layer, making that bottom part just slightly darker. So it's creating that darker color because it's the second coat of paint right there, just on the bottom. I didn't repaint the entire robe. And then same thing with the sleeves, kind of a second coat of paint on the sleeves. Kind of creates darker layer right here as well, on the side and on the bottom. And next we are going to get these beautiful pine trees in. So we have a large pine tree on the left side of the canvas, and we have a large pine tree on the right. So we want to use our number 4 round brush for this, and we are using the Ultramarine Blue mixed with the Hooker's Green Permanent. So you want to go ahead and mix both of those colors together. You're going to create a very dark blue-green color. You want to add a little bit of water to that, but it's not a watercolor consistency. It's just enough to kind of thin it down so that we can work these trees. So we want our paint to be a little bit more flowy so that we can form the trees easily. And I'm loading that paint color on the tip of the brush. This larger tree started just above the gnome's hat, so the top is, you can see how high that goes, a little bit higher than the top of his hat. And you want to paint each set of branches kind of one row at a time. So loading your brush in the blue and the green, start from the left and then work your way to the right, and you're just dragging each row of branches down from the top to the bottom so that paint goes on the tip of the brush, and each branch dragging from top to bottom. Pay attention to the sides, the edges of it. You want those branches kind of curving and sticking out on that, so you can see as you work your way down, you're making that tree wider and wider. The branches, the row of branches get wider. That forms that conical shape. It's okay to add a teeny bit of water in there. Just don't water it down too much, but that little bit of water really helps with the flow so that you can control these strokes. And so just each row, as you approach the bottom, your branches might get longer. So these strokes are actually getting longer and thicker. And our tree is going to go off the canvas, but you want to make sure that your branches are not overlapping any of that gnome. So this bottom part of this tree is behind our gnome, so we just want to make sure our branches get as close as possible without overlapping it. And then your branches might go off the canvas as well. And then the base of that goes to where that snowy land area is that we painted earlier. So I'm just going back in with my blue and green, and I'm just filling up some of these open gaps. It doesn't have to be completely filled. We are going to add another layer to this. When this dries, we will be adding a snow layer to this. So this is just the darker, shadowy part of the tree. I'm just going back over that with kind of a second coat to fill that up, forming that shape. Kind of paying attention to the edges, making some of those branches kind of stick out on the edges. And there is our first tree. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the right. So we'll be doing a smaller tree on the right, just adding a few more branches towards the bottom of that tree. So same color, same technique. The top of this tree is lower than our other tree, but it's still about the height of his hat. The other one went higher than his hat. This one is about the same height. And same thing, only smaller. So starting at the top, each row I'm stroking down, forming the shape of the tree. This one also goes off the canvas on the right. Depending on your gnome drawing, it might go behind the gnome a little bit, especially the beard area, and that's okay. Just make sure you're not painting over any of that gnome, and just get to the base of your snow area. Pay attention to the edges, make some of those branches stick out on the edges. Next, I'm going to add a second coat of Ultramarine Blue to his mittens. So rinsing that green off the brush and using that number 4 round brush, painting a second coat on his mittens, and that will create a darker, more opaque color on there. And then I'm going to do the edging on his sleeve, so he has this white fluffy texture on the edge of his sleeve. So I'm just taking my titanium white and painting that edging, little circular strokes using a thick layer of paint. This is just titanium white, and doing that edging. And then we can do the little details in his skates. So we have the little tie shoelaces. So I just did 3 little zigzag lines on the top edge of his skate. And then where his laces are tied, I did 2 little loops. And then the edges of those loops are going towards the right. So you can use a much tinier brush if your 4 round seems too thick for this tiny detail. And then I did a little highlight on the top of his mitten and another little highlight on the top of his nose using that titanium white. Next, I did the patterns on his hat, so I added some of that green to my palette. You can even mix that with the blue if you want that to stand out a little bit better. So for example, if your first layer of hat is a little dark and the pattern isn't showing up, you can do the pattern with blue mixed with green, kind of like how we did the trees. So we're just doing a fun little pattern. You can do straight lines, dots, little X's, you can do little hearts, little snowflakes, kind of a sweater pattern design. And you just want to make sure that your stripes are going in the direction of the hat, so our hat is curving and flowing to the right. So you want to make sure your patterns are going in that same direction. By now our tree should be dry, or for the most part dry. If it's a little bit wet, you can still do this step. It's okay if some of our snow mixes with our blue, but if it's soaking wet, I would dry it or wait and then come back to this step. So the way I do snow on trees with this particular one, I use the round brush. So I'm still using that number 4 round brush, and just titanium white, not mixed with anything, so pure white. I start at the bottom and I do the same kind of strokes. So I'm doing rows of curved branch strokes, working from the right to the left, and I'm stroking each of those downwards, but I'm skipping a row. So we start at the bottom, stroking down, skip a row, and you want to skip the row because you want a lot of that dark color still showing through. That's going to create kind of more depth in your tree. We don't want to just completely cover it with white. So you're just stroking each of those down, and you can do your branches that are sticking out on the side as well. And you're just working your way up the tree, kind of making a pattern of dark white, dark white, dark white, and that creates the snow effect on your tree. You can do an extra pop of white right on the edges. So some of those branches I created unique strokes that they weren't green or blue before. They're their own. And then I'm going to take this white and just do a few little thin horizontal lines on the ice area, kind of throughout that. If you need it to overlap some of the skate lines, you can do that, but just a few little white lines here and there adds to the icy effect. And then we can start doing some things up in the sky. So there's not a lot going on up here, but to make it a little bit more interesting, we can do little blurry snowflakes. So I just took my finger, my index finger, dipped that in the white paint, and just kind of smeared it to create a blurry circle. So you can do that all throughout the sky. If you wanted to paint snowflakes, you can. It's just that this sky is such a light color that the white doesn't provide a lot of contrast. So if you did snowflakes, it may not show up that well, but these little tiny blurry circles kind of add interest up in that area. So you can do a combination of that. You can also just do dots for snow, and we'll do dots for snow regardless, kind of all throughout the painting. But I am doing this to give it kind of a special effect up in the sky. So you just make a dot and then smear it with your finger. And then if you want, you can make another circle, dot circle inside of those if you want to make them brighter looking. So I did it mostly on the right side of the sky. I did a few kind of on the left, but for the most part, the blurry circles are on the upper right. So you're just going to keep doing that, and then also paint little dots of snow all throughout the painting. If you wanted to use a toothbrush to do a splatter speckle snow effect, you can. I did not do that for this painting. I decided not to, but if you want to do that, you can. This step takes quite a bit of time to do because all of the little dots that we're doing, you can paint dots over the icy area if you want to. If you can paint a few over the gnome if you feel brave enough to paint snow dots over the gnome. Maybe snow that's kind of landing on his hat or nose. But I am going to go silent here while I finish this step. And the last minute touch that I decided to do was add a little bit more of this blue shadowing, specifically under his skate and under the tree. That's that watercolor consistency of the Ultramarine Blue and just using the side of my brush to kind of swipe it across the canvas. But that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint an ice skating gnome. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching and thanks for painting with me.